You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. This is Justin, and I'm bringing you a comparison. Gale Force 9's Classic Dune and the streamlined new Dune board games. If you are interested in the actual reviews of either of these games, we have both of those episodes available. Be sure to check those out for the particular details that I liked and didn't like about those games. Let's dive into what New Dune and Dune Classic do differently from each other, and where you might want to make a decision point of which Dune is the right Dune for you. Price point wise, this is not a very tough thing because they're both $50, so there is really nothing to say one Dune has a better price point than the other, but they do offer different aspects. So the first difference I want to call out is that Dune Classic is a 2 to 6 player game and New Dune is a 2 to 4 player game, and that's going to be important in a little bit when I talk about factions. But if you have a larger play group, that may be a factor for you. Another thing I want to call out is the game time. Dune Classic is at the 2-hour plus our partial day level of gameplay, where New Dune can actually be played in an hour or so. There may be a second decision point for you in that regard. Now, art comparison. Classic Dune has its own art style, and it has a very bright and colorful board that is very distinctive and clear to read. The art in New Dune is using the movie stills and movie actors and actresses, as well as some of the props that are used in the films. And the game board itself has a darker, more ominous tone to it. The lines of territories are still pretty defined, but the lines of sectors can get a little lost in there. Now, the one thing I will say that the New Dune board has over Dune Classic is the names are a little bit clearer to read on the newer board. Both offer a phase guide, and one other. New Dune is played in 5 turns or less, where Dune Classic could go up to 10 turns. So that factors into that gameplay time again. While the boards are very, very similar in their territory layout, there are a couple combined territories in the new game versus the old one. Nothing so dramatic that I don't think it does anything besides make some of those smaller territory steps a little bit more manageable in moving your forces around. The spice blow marks are very clear on the old board. They are lost on the darker side of the planet in the new board. I'm not a fan of that personally. Another comparison would be the rulebook. The classic rulebook is 25 pages and the new rulebook is 15. Now, the classic does have at least one page dedicated to each of the 6 factions in the game, so there's at least 6 pages right there just based on factions, and New Dune trims that a little bit to about a half page per faction. One of the largest comparisons to note is not only the game length round times, but also some of the faction powers are different. Bene Gesserit do not exist in New Dune, and they are existing in Classic Dune, which one of the powers was predicting who would win and at what turn. So a lot of that stuff has been removed just for simplicity and streamlining sake. But one thing I want to make sure to call out in this comparison is the phases of a turn. So in Classic Dune, you had 9 phases per round that you went through. And in New Dune, there's only 7. One of the biggest things that they had removed was the Charm Charity and the bidding phase and combined those into just gaining cards. Likewise, the Mentat phase, which was very much like an upkeep phase, is kind of just been removed. That's kind of where that Bene Gesserit power would potentially trigger if they were correct. One of the things that New Dune does from Dune Classic is with the factions being streamlined to only 4, the Emperor and Bene Gesserit were combined into like their own faction. The Spacing Guild is pretty much removed from the game. The Harkonnen, Fremen, and Atreides are still present. They mostly play the same way as in Dune Classic, but the Imperium kind of takes a hybrid approach between the Emperor faction and the Bene Gesserit faction from Classic. The most important thing to call out with those is there was a noticeable difference in the games if you were playing Dune Classic without the right factions in play because of the way the economic passing of spice worked. And I never got that feeling with New Dune. Depending on what factions were in, the game did shift in its tone, but it never shifted in such a way where I felt with that faction on the table or off the table, there was a distinctive advantage or disadvantage to the game itself. And I do appreciate is the battles and the trader mechanics in both games are relatively the same, and they lean into the theme of Dune very well, and I think that was one of the most important things to keep is Classic Dune and New Dune do feel like you're playing the story of Dune, but not necessarily the story as written. The pieces and the players are there set up at the beginning of the novel, and you hit play on your game and see how it goes from there. One thing that New Dune has going for it is with the 4 factions, there's a little bit less to balance between them than the 6 factions or 8 factions if you get the Dune Classic with its expansion. Likewise, in the 2-player variant of the game, you actually play 2 allied forces in New Dune, where you'd only play a single force in Classic, lend into that unbalanced feeling a lot more in Classic with those factions. Essentially, a 2-player game is you're just playing 2 factions simultaneously as a team, and all 4 factions are then present in the game. The flow and feel and balance is still there for it. So, all that being said, for the final verdict of Classic versus New, it's going to depend on you as a player and you as a player group. If you are game group who wants a classic feeling game or a long based game or just has 6 players, I would say Dune Classic is the answer. If you like really isometrical factions, Dune Classic is the answer. If you want something more streamlined, if you want something more playable within an evening and to be able to possibly play it again or other games in that same game evening, New Dune is probably the better choice for you. Likewise, if you want to make sure it feels like a more modern game or a game that has a little less swing to it, more gameplay choices, then I would say New Dune would be the answer for you. Likewise, both games are excellent in their own right, and I believe both could exist in your collection if you so choose it. Though, if you only had to pick one, I would go off of those decision points that I had just described. If play group and all that is to be set aside, I would probably give a small edge to New Dune, mostly because of the cleaned up balance of the factions. This has been Tabletop Arcanum's comparison between Classic Dune and New Dune. We have reviews of both of those games individually available, so take a listen to those if one sounds more appealing to than the other. Likewise, make sure you follow us on our social medias. That's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Hit those notifications, get those updates so that you know when we have a new episode available for you. And as always, thanks for listening and happy gaming. You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, produced by Justin Taylor. This episode is hosted by Justin Taylor. Mixing and editing by Richard Geese. Original theme by Paul Moore and Issac Gilbert. Check the description for this episode's featured background music. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and leave us a review if you would. As always, thanks for listening.